February 26, 2013, for the purpose of a public work session. In addition, you may consider a motion to go into closed meeting by order of the mayor. Mr. Cherry?
Here.
Mr. Edmonds?
Here.
Mr. Meeks?
Here.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons?
Here.
Ms. Randall?
Here.
Mayor Wright?
Here.
Mr. Rowe?
Oh, thank you. Janie's up first.
Yes.
Yeah. She hopefully has some great news. Good news.
I hope
Super
so.
news.
Super news.
Super news, right.
Well, we can get that.
She's working on the motion for executive session. She's at the phone.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. I'm happy to be here tonight to share with you the Real Estate Reassessment Annual Report. And it's titled Positive Signs for Portsmouth's Future.
Like that title.
Yay.
I told you good news.
And of course, the purpose of this briefing is to provide a summary of real property assessments as proposed for July 1, 2013. To provide a summary of value changes for each individual neighborhood. This is commercial as well as residential. Provide a summary discussion of the derivation of the numbers, and provide a summary of some recently completed and future projects throughout the city. Our overview, legal requirements. The purpose of the assessment process is to distribute the burden of taxation evenly and equitably. State code requires assessments to be uniform on the same class of property within geographic limits. State code also requires assessor to strive for 100% of fair market value. Our focus areas are improved equity and uniformity among similar properties, identify and list undocumented improvements, as well as the finalization of our contract and the beginning of the new camera system conversion. The duties and responsibilities. Pursuant to Title 58.1 of the Code of Virginia, it is my duty to ensure that the burden of taxation shall rest equally upon all the citizens of the City of Portsmouth. To arrive at an annual assessment that shall be made at 100% of fair market value, emphasizing market activity from January 1st through December 31st, 2012. To continually improve uniformity and equity in assessments among similar property classes. Market value defined. Market value means the most probable price which a property should bring in a competitive and open market under all conditions requisite to a fair sale. And then I have listed the characteristics and requirements of a fair market sale. Buyers and sellers are typically motivated. Both parties are well informed or well advised and acting in what they consider to be their own best interest. A reasonable time is allowed for exposure in the open market. Payment is made in terms of cash and U.S. dollars or in terms of financial arrangements comparable thereto, and the price represents the normal consideration for the property sold, unaffected by special or creative financing or sales concessions granted by anyone associated with the sale. The reassessment results had some major obstacles. Foreclosure market, we'll be getting into that as we get a little bit further into with a little bit of explanation of what exactly is going on. Unresolved fiscal policy decisions. For those of us that were at the work session last night, we were all exposed to that, what the possible changes could be. At this point, we don't know, but they do exist and they do affect the market. Underwater mortgages, depressing families' net worth. Lack of availability for single-family residential developers, and increasing retail vacancy rates. But we do have some positive indicators. Interest rates are at an all-time low. National market indicators indicates positive for several consecutive months. Increasing credit for home buyers. strong growth in the apartment sector of the commercial market, and stabilization among other commercial sectors. We're going to take a look at the total real estate transfers. We go from 7 to 12. Our emphasis this year, of course, will be on 2012. Last year, 2011, was 2866. This year, it's 2837. A little bit less than last year, but a very negligible amount that really does not affect the overall values in the city. We're going to look at the real estate transfers by month. This is pretty typical. It's still pretty volatile as far as the transfers are concerned, but stable to compare to last year. And as I told you, we're going to touch a little bit on the foreclosures. The total number of foreclosures was up slightly for 2012, and they remain a concern as they represent 19.88% of all transfers. But the reporting rules for banks and other lending institutions have changed, driving the numbers up, which has caused a number of the lenders and the institutes to now record their foreclosures and actually put them out there, where before they were holding them in a gray or shaded area. And we do expect to see more changes take place in this area. Market time for sold properties. This is an excellent indicator of the improvement in our market. For 2012, the average days on the market were 66. It's greatly improved, and for those of you there again that were at the work session last night, this was also confirmed by the presentation of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. They also mentioned the length of time on market and how greatly it has improved. Reassessment results, market conditions. The market conditions presented indicate stabilization, in the overall market. The total number of transfers is stable. The total number of foreclosures has increased due in part to the new reporting requirements by lending institutions. Economic factors. I have considered the economic factors affecting real property, sales studies, and other pertinent data in determining the effect on the overall assessed value. Reassessment results. Our reassessment resulted in an overall decrease of 0.35. And I stress that 0.35, which is less than 0.5%. The overall assessed value and the reductions taken in each individual neighborhood are as follows. I'm not going to go through all the commercial and the residential changes. There's quite a few of them. There's a varying amount of changes throughout the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods receiving decrease range from a low of 0.01% to a high of minus 12.7%. The increases in the neighborhood range from 0.01% up to a whopping 79.57%. The condominium market has continued to slump due in part to the competitiveness of the more luxurious apartments styles. The more luxurious apartment style living, coupled with the increase of cost associated with the condo associations. And I bring this to your attention because as you look through the neighborhoods and look through their reductions, the majority of reductions are in the condos, townhouse area. And I wanted to bring this to your attention. The reason for the increases is we've had, believe it or not, we have had 95 new construction residences in the city of Portsmouth through the third quarter. Brighton had 2, Ebony Heights had 1, First Watch at River Point had 15, Forest Park had 1, Green Acres 1, Highland Biltmore 1, Newport had 18 new construction, Old Town had 1, Seaboard Square had 42, Shea Terrace 2, Siesta Gardens 1, The Gateway at Sterling Point 4, West Haven 1, West Haven Park 1, Westwood 1, and Portsmouth Estates 3, which is 95. And in this market, that is absolutely remarkable, and we're very, very proud of that. So the reassessment results. Overall, residential property values declined 0.48%. 48.38% of residential neighborhoods saw a reduction in their value. Less than 1% saw an increase. 51.57% remained unchanged, and commercial properties saw an increase citywide of less than 0.01%. The reassessment result. This slide, I wanted to take an opportunity to show y'all exactly how we begin our reassessment and where our totals come from. So the first thing that we do is we go to the land book that was created for July 1st, 2012. We take the beginning balance, which was the $6,992,000. Supplemental values, we in the first 3 quarters of this year have added close to $60 million in value, which is a wonderful thing there again in this economy. This supplemental value includes quarterly building permit activity, non-taxable to taxable properties, and undocumented improvements. So our totals, including supplements that we began at, is $7,051,412,239. From that, we're going to take our 0.35%, which gives us a total of $7,027,023,898, which, as you can see, is an increase from last year's ending value. It's important to note that the total assessed values do not include fourth quarter building permit activity or any undocumented value that may be identified during fourth quarter building permit field work. Undocumented field work through the third quarter is approximately $1.8 million. In addition to that, we also will have the value from the SCC, State Corporation Commission. The State Corporation Commission operates on an annual basis where we operate on a physical basis. We don't normally receive the assessments from the State Corporation Commission until late August or early September. And it's important to note that the percentage of SCC values received is based on our assessment ratio by the State Department of Taxation. And once again, I'm proud to report that we are maintaining our 100% of fair market value. For the current year, the SCC properties were assessed at approximately $140.3 million, which generated tax revenue of approximately $1.8 million. Completed projects. The slide that you're seeing now is phase 2 of Hamilton Place. This was an additional 84 units. This is an excellent example of a partnership between the city and PRHA. These 84 units went from non-taxable to taxable and are now carried on our tax roll. Another completed project that we have is the Tidewater Staffing Building that's located on Florida Avenue. We also have the Halls Creek subdivision. And I wanted to point this out to you because I wanted you to be aware that 12 lots have been subdivided. The lots are assessed currently at $62,560 apiece, or approximately $750,000, which will generate about $9,500 in real estate taxes. And there is one house currently under construction. This right here is very, very interesting and speaks very well of the city of Portsmouth. This is a gateway at Sterling Creek. This project was foreclosed in 2010 and sat vacant for quite some time. The lending institution chose to complete the development in lieu of allowing it to sit and deteriorate, and also to bring down the values of those properties that were already there and those persons that who had bought in good faith. Through the third quarter, we've only picked up 4 units, but fourth quarter we're going to have 19 units that are selling for an average of $205,000 per unit, which equates to $3.8 million, or just under $50,000 in real estate taxes that will be added to the values that we've already discussed. Future projects, the Chick-fil-A, that's expected, and the value is expected to be picked up during our fourth quarter building permit period. The apartments formerly at Charlie Falk Auto Site. The Cookout Hamburger on Victory Boulevard is currently going strong. And of course, the Kroger Marketplace on the former Norcom site. And just for a few of my final remarks, just to let you know, the new assessment notices are being mailed today. They are dated the 26th of February. Informal appeals will be held from March 14th through March 29th. We will also have evening appointments available on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, beginning on the 14th. They are by appointment only, and they will be beginning at 5 and will run until 7. The Board of Equalization has been appointed for this year by the Circuit Court and is currently preparing a schedule of hearing dates. The board consists of 3 citizens of the city of Portsmouth, and we really appreciate greatly the service that they do. Ms. Flossie Bridgeford, Mr. James Overton, and Ms. Sheila Edmonds. Additionally, I will continue to have a member of my appraisal team attend council meetings throughout the appeal season so that any citizen who may have issues can be served immediately. I would like for y'all to, for those of you who do not know Earl, if you'd stand up for just a minute. This is Earl Gaskins. He's our senior real estate appraiser, and he and Billy Butt will be attending all of the council meetings and assisting anyone who needs assistance during that particular time. Another thing that we have really been working very diligently on in the past 1.5 to 2 years is the community outreach. And we're really striving to speak with civic leagues and other civic organizations throughout the city to promote transparency through the assessor's office. For so many years, the assessor's office has appeared as a great big black hole which nobody knew anything about, and we want to change that. We're encouraging all citizens to review their property record cards and to talk with us at any time during the year. This program has been well received, and I have spoken to several groups, including Cavalier Manor and First Watch Civic Leagues, the Portsmouth Women's Club, Sterling Cove Civic League, River Shore, and we're also participating in the Portsmouth Citizens Academy, among other things. Do you have any questions? Earl?
Very good.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Very good. So we're looking at going back to your reassessment results, we're looking at a net gain of about $30 million.
Yes, sir. And of course, that is before we have our fourth quarter. And we are, hopefully, we are anticipating a fairly large fourth quarter.
One more. Last year's, as you go through people coming to the Board of Equalization and having differences with your assessments and what they feel, how did the whole last year piece go?
It went fabulously. We have one of the board members here, and in actuality, they only changed one assessment that went to the Board of Equalization. Other than that, all of our assessments were upheld.
Okay, very good.
How's our camera system?
The camera system is actually coming along very well. It has actually been installed. We do have access to it. We really haven't started using it yet, but we're just kind of trying to get used to it. IT is working with them for the implementation of several of the programs and the conversion thereof. And we're planning some early training, then with a lull in there to give everyone an opportunity to become familiar with that.
Do you have anything you need to get that up and running? You need anything from us to get that up and running? You okay?
I'm okay at this point in time. You know how conservative I am, Mr. Cherry. So I'd like to see where we're at with what we've got and then possibly go from there.
Okay. And I just want to say that, you know, I had about, over the course of the year, 4 or 5 citizens come to me about having come to your office for help. And even the one who didn't get what he wanted complimented your office on the professionalism and how well y'all dealt with him and laid out and explained to him the process. So kudos to your staff. And I know one of them said they met with you personally. The other one said they met with staff. So kudos to you guys for taking the time with citizens. Even though I think one of them said the appeal season was over, but you guys still sat down and walked them through the process and did what you could for them. So appreciate
Yes,
that.
sir.
What are the appeal parameters, Janie, as far as the time window?
Well, the official, and I'm going to put that in parentheses, the official informal hearings begin March 14th and run through the 29th. The appeal forms will be available online and in our office. And I've told lots of people, if they don't have a computer and they don't want to come down, we'll be glad to mail them to them. We are also going to provide forms at the treasurer's office at the Churchland Library. We had a call for that last year, and that worked out very well. It seems to be easier for them to go there than it does to go to the individual fire stations to pick them up. But we do not refuse anyone at any time. The only thing that I will tell a citizen is that the code provides for 2 things. The first is an annual reassessment, which means once I do the assessment, I cannot reassess until the next assessment period. But if there is an error, we can change that at any time. If we've got it listed as 3 bathrooms and it's 2 bathrooms, we will immediately make the change and will abate the taxes that have been paid during that error change.
Okay, so they have 15 days as far as the official time window.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then right after that, the state code also provides that anyone that has 4 units or less, they have 45-day period before going to the Board of Equalization. I've talked with the city attorney regarding that, and it's no problem if they want to go before. We're not going to hold them to that 15 days. That's just to give the persons that need the opportunity an opportunity to do that.
Right.
So, and the board is going to meet next week, hopefully, and come up with the dates, which we will be publishing. The dates for our hearings will be in the Currents this Saturday, and they also appear on the assessment notices. So they are widely available. And we've already been assisting some persons. We've had a number of people that have come in already. We've explained to them the situation. We've taken the information that they have, given them cards, and asked them to call back after they receive their assessment. Because we weren't about to tell them whether they changed or had not changed without council being briefed on it and everyone receiving their notices at the same time.
Thank you. Very nice presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Rowe?
Yes, sir. Sherry's going to pass out some talking points, and as she does that, I'm going to go off the agenda just a little bit. We talk about ourselves being a family, and I want to report on the family member. Keep Jimmy Williams and his son in your prayers. His son, Jay, is having major surgery in Roanoke, and think about Jimmy, and again, please remember him in your prayers.
Absolutely.
This is a fairly serious operation. Sherry, we welcomed home on Monday.
Yes.
And gave her a great big hug. And she's here to report. She did a wonderful job up there.
All the time.
As the mayor says, it's a nutty place.
the
I mean, it is really a nutty place. And she came back sane.
Same.
Yes.
Thank you, Brad. That remains to be seen. Thanks, John.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Good evening, Mayor Wright, Vice Mayor Cherry, members of council, City Manager Rowe, staff. I'm going to quickly just give you a update on what happened with the General Assembly. As you know, we ended on time on the 23rd. The governor now has 30 days to approve all the legislation has gone to his desk. They'll reconvene on April the 3rd to deal with the actions from the governor. 4 of the city's 8 legislative initiatives passed, including our charter initiatives, and they have gone to the governor's desk for signature. The transportation bill passed in conference. That has 3 major components to it: a statewide component, a Northern Virginia Transportation Authority component, and a Hampton Roads Region component. Quickly touching on the Hampton Roads Region component, approximately $175 to $200 million will be generated through several different tax revenue actions, to include the additional sales tax of 70%, an additional retail use tax of 70%, which is not going to be on any food for human consumption, and the 5% tax on all tangible personal property except motor vehicles, water, and aircraft vehicles. Funds will be directed to the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization for high priority construction projects on new and existing roads in the Hampton Roads region, as approved by the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization. Quickly turning to the budget. This is an off-budget year, so there weren't any, I was just making tweaks to the introduced budget. So quickly, just a couple of items that are interest to the city of Portsmouth. The FY14 estimated direct aid to public education distribution increased by $161,670. So they're estimating our amount to be $89,636,736. Library aid was increased for local libraries in the amount of $450,000, and that's going to all local libraries for digital information resources. There's a separate amount allocated to the city of Portsmouth's libraries of $2,750 for basic computer instruction. Another item of interest.
We take the 450 and divide it by all of the libraries. That's our piece plus the 2,750 for the, okay.
Yes, sir, correct.
Ain't much, but it's something.
It's something.
It's a drop in the bucket.
Okay.
There was the Virginia Public Building Authority. There were some bonds approved. A couple of them were for specific situations, for specific localities, but for localities in general, $35 million was approved to assist localities in meeting federally mandated stormwater improvements, and $10 million was approved to reimburse local governments for the state share of the sewage treatment plant upgrades. There was this new Opportunity Education Division came along with legislation and some budget amendments. We were successful at killing 2 of the bills. One of the bills actually passed, and it did have a enactment clause on it stating that if it wasn't financed in the budget, it wouldn't come to pass. So the budget now has $150,000 in it to establish it in FY14, and this division is going to take over schools that are denied accreditation for 2 years. State and local per pupil spending are going to be transferred to the division. And then finally, the Medicaid expansion piece. The House and the Senate agreed on an approach to expand Medicaid coverage to 400,000 additional Virginians. However, the agreement has 3 elements that first must be met. First one is the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Department of Medical Assistance Services must develop a comprehensive, value-driven, market-based reform of Virginia Medicaid and the famous programs in 3 phases. They also need to authorize, they also authorize DMAS to pursue the waivers and plans necessary to implement the optional coverage expansion. And finally, they established a 10-member Medicaid Innovation and Reform Commission whose approval will be required to implement any expansion. Questions?
Does that mean it's really going to happen or not?
No.
Probably won't. They don't have the money to do it.
Maybe.
That's wishful thinking.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for all that you do.
That's right.
You're welcome.
Good job this year.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
We're working on a video device. And, you know, Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, and the mayor brought it to my attention that Norfolk does that. And hopefully next year, or maybe even when they reconvene, we'll be able to have a place where you can click on the internet and get a video report on what's going on from Sherry. The problem is getting the production at that end. But anyway, that's a goal.
Before going on, one of the things I'd like for us to really be cognizant of, she's totally an asset
Oh,
to
absolutely.
the city of Portsmouth. And I think a lot of times we don't say how much we appreciate the magnitude of her services. But to travel in her heels and the job that she does, you would not believe it. I was dumb enough to feel as if I wanted to know more, and I traveled in her shoes for one day. And I'm a young woman. I want y'all to understand that. And I felt like I needed somebody to rub every muscle in my body for the next 2 days. This lady, I don't think we always think in terms of her really giving her the credit for the information that she brings to us. Because without her, she speaks up. She's not one that just sits in a meeting and listens. If it's something that she feels is not beneficial to the city of Portsmouth, she speaks up, and she's well respected because she's knowledgeable. And I want you to know that, because a lot of you do not go up to those meetings and see what she does and walk in her shoes. But I tried it a few times, and I found I was too young for it.
What you're really saying is we should give her a nice round.
There you go. That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Moody.
She does.
All right, sir.
Thank you.
I feel so proud.
That's right. Oh, yeah.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
She
Good
is
job.
dynamite.
We're going to go to this briefing that's before you, and I want to ask Fred, this relates to the email that I sent you this afternoon. Fred?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Mayor Wright, Vice Mayor Cherry, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. During the past 3 months, staff has been providing to council briefings on the issues with CCDI. Tonight, I'm here to provide information on the current status of this issue and report on a new development. At the conclusion of the last briefing, council concurred with staff's recommendation to allow the 3 subject home properties to be sold by BB&T and to work with HUD in repaying the $313,000 for uncompleted terminated projects. This solution was reached and was to use a reduction in next year's home allocation as a means of repaying that money. HUD has required a number of items to be accomplished, and they are: 1, a 30-day comment period on this action to be advertised to receive public comments. This period is currently ongoing. The advertisement has run. A letter from the city manager and mayor on the need of the action. A draft letter is being prepared this week. And then a resolution from city council requesting that action occur. The resolution will be brought to you in the latter part of March after we complete the 30-day comment period. After the last briefing to council, a 4th CCDI project that used other funding sources and that staff had felt was moving to a successful closure encountered financial problems. CCDI currently owns one more parcel of land in Portsmouth at 2520 Lansing Avenue. There are no deeds of trust on this property, and I guess that's the good news. CCDI used Neighborhood Stabilization Program funds, NSP, to acquire and renovate the property. It's important to note that while this program is similar, this is not a home project. It is a separate type of project. In the NSP, the funds are administered by the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development, not HUD, and that's an important point. At the time of CCDI's closing its doors at the end of December, there remained approximately $18,000 of work to complete this project. Staff coordinated with DHCD staff and CCDI so that the property could then be deeded to Habitat for Humanity, which is a qualified CHOTA, who would complete the project and take the necessary repair cost from the sale proceeds of the property. There's a major difference from this and the other three properties is that it's a qualified buyer who has been approved by the bank for this property. They've been identified and they're ready and willing to purchase the property. Since the time of our previous concern.
Habitat is ready, willing, and able to finish the project, but there's a big but, and we're going to cover the but.
The big but, curveball as it may be, is that while there are no deeds of trust, there are a number of deeds, judgments, and liens on the property. You heard from a young lady at our last council meeting talking about that. She has a judgment against the property. As this property has proceeded, and in your initial paperwork, we were requesting of roughly $60,000. IRS is continuing to file liens and penalties against the property, and that has grown substantially. That's why we're trying to get this out of CCDI's hands as soon as possible so that other liens cannot be placed on it. Right now, you can see from the board that the Fosters have almost $30,000, $42,000 in IRS liens, Virginia Employment Commission lien of almost $3,000, and then a workman's comp of $500. And we are checking this. It's been almost an hourly title search to try and keep up with these liens as they come in. And these liens have to be satisfied in order for the property to be transferred to Habitat.
Now, it's important to note that these liens are not just on this property, it's on any property owned by CCDI. So if we can get this property out of CCDI's ownership, the quicker we can do that, liens stop accruing. These liens are against whichever property gets sold first from CCDI.
So the Fosters really have nothing to do with this property?
That's correct.
That's correct.
That's right.
Yeah, Ms. Foster came before council at the last meeting. What she did not tell you is that they sued CCDI. They were seeking a six-figure judgment.
Settlement.
Right. CCDI did not show up in court. The judge heard the case and entered a judgment that was roughly $28,000. The $29,000 represents the judgment plus interest accrued to today. And this is the number that's the variable because it's like dropping shoes. As soon as we can get this property out of CCDI's ownership, there can be more shoes to drop, but it's not going to be our problem. And where we're obligated, we're on the hook to $127,000. So we want to protect that.
Anything under that,
Yes, ma'am.
we're ahead of the game.
Correct.
Mr. Rowe, have we put any type of safeguards in place, not just for this CHOTA, but I see tonight we're allocating $425,000 to another organization. Have we checked to make sure their state corporation is in place, any taxes are behind, so we don't become, we don't get back into the same issue with another company?
On the item that you're talking about, we're checking that one as we're talking because I was not aware of the fact that they had an address that is different from what you might think would be an appropriate address. But we had a unique situation here with CCDI, and it's been happening for more than half of the decade.
But if we had safeguards in place, we could have probably caught some of the stuff. If we would check, anytime we get ready to allocate money to a group or foundation or a company to check the state corporation, check for any liens or taxes, would that be a expensive process for the city?
No, sir, it would not.
Would that be something we might want to look into?
Yes, sir. And again, we have, since Jeff has been on board, we have really tightened up the whole process on how these properties are managed. And this one doesn't relate so much to this particular...
This property, right.
Right.
Is liens from all 10 or 12 of their prories. This is the last one they got.
And of course, this one stands in front of all of them, right here.
Are we sure this is the last one?
No, sir. I mean, it's, you know, I don't know what their status is with the IRS, and that's why it's really important to act on this. Our recommendation is that you act on it tonight. George is prepared to close the deal tomorrow, because once we can get it from their ownership to Habitat, the IRS can keep putting on liens, but it's not on this property.
Okay.
And what we're trying to do
Any
is...
additional IRS liens would then attach to those properties that are up for auction, the BB&T properties.
Hold up, Danny. Go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I guess my question kind of dovetails with what Councilman Meeks is saying. You know, we've been to a few meetings and we get little bits and pieces, and I appreciate the information that's being gathered. But I guess my question is, what is the legal status of CCDI? And the reason why I say that, they had a board of directors, and I don't know that they actually had nonprofit status, but a board of directors for a nonprofit certainly has a duty of care, duty of loyalty, and a duty of obedience. And I think a duty of obedience, some of the tenets in that is that their responsibility is to make sure it's following state, federal guidelines as to the operation of that entity. You know, and I guess the duty of care is that the board is supposed to make sure that they're making sound decisions. So my question is, what's the legal status? I think I asked the question a few weeks ago, what is the responsibility of the board? I mean, was it a cake and ice cream board? Or was it a board of directors that hired and fired the directors? I'm not certain I know the answers to that. Well, and we're talking about the allocating money here. I don't even know that I know what their assets are, what the liabilities. I know they had an office. I've been in the office. Was that a lease? Did they own the building? It's a lot of questions here beyond, well, you know, the bank had a lien on this and we need to allocate so much money. I want a post-mortem on this thing, and I wanted to know what the responsibility of this board was regarding this train wreck that we've seen. And, I open the floor up. Anybody's got any answers,
George,
I'm all ears.
I got that question.
Mr. Meeks wanted to say something, and I'll be glad to respond to the question.
Do we have a list of the board members?
We can get that. I don't have a list.
And then usually we have a board that shows a lot of credibility, and that's why I asked for the list of the board members, because I want to see exactly who was on the board and what the relationship was. So
We did request from the State Corporation Commissioner a list of the board members. The only one that came up was the chairman, Maury Cook. That's the only name that appears.
Yeah.
And from some of the deeds, a couple of other names of people signing, but mainly they're either Mr. Cook or Mr. Asbury, who was a former director. As far as the liability of the directors, liability is to the extent of the assets of the corporation, unless you can show that they unless there's some showing that they personally benefited, and then it becomes a personal issue. But otherwise, when a corporation goes out of business, the corporate officers are just there to represent the corporation, basically in bankruptcy or the defunct corporation. They accept service, but it's like getting blood out of a turnip. If the turnip doesn't have any more blood in it, you're not going to get anything out of it. But they're there to accept service and that sort of thing.
What is the legal status? Are they still a corporation?
Mm-hmm. They've closed their doors.
They filed.
Closing your doors is one thing.
That's one thing, right?
I don't believe they filed with the State Corporation Commission
that's
or
what I'm getting at.
requested to have their or surrendered their license.
And then receiving those money under false pretenses. Because they came in here knowing they couldn't stay, they wasn't stable. What options do we have for that?
Well, that's something that's more in the purview of the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, because if you're accepting money under false pretenses, that rises to potentially to the level of fraud.
Ladies and gentlemen, these are questions that we have asked internally. I don't want you to think that we're not concerned about the very same things. We are, and we've had conversations with the chief and with the Commonwealth's attorney. That we've had the same concerns, Bill, that you've raised. And we're looking at the contracts to see if there's any breach of contracts. It's a real, train wreck is a good description. It's not a bad one. Hopefully our involvement with this ends with this matter right here. We're trying to protect the $127,000 that
that's right.
we're going to have to give back in some fashion. And if we can pay 60 cents on the dollar, that is to satisfy these liens, then I think that's a good deal.
Yeah.
I mean, we've looked at this inside out and upside down.
And the house ends up with a family.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
An important thing.
That's a
It's not
plus.
like it's not like the other three houses that are really stuck and will take a lot of work to get those done.
Well, whose responsibility, though, if it's still incorporated, it's still live as a corporate entity? Is that's a true statement?
Yeah. But Mr. Moody,
Well, if it's still alive,
it's barely got a pulse.
it can still do business. It can still take in money if there's any to be had from any direction. I'm just not comfortable with the status of it. We say they close their doors, but it's still a living, breathing corporation that can do things.
Can you get to the next slide?
the thing that I'm most concerned about is the standard operating procedures that we had in the original agreement, what they were. And when those things were not adhered to, it should have been some type of follow-up before seeing the doors closed. But we had already had a hint that something was amiss in what was going on. You know where I'm coming from, George. Prior to it hitting the fan as it had. We can't afford to ignore it. I think what we need to do is to go through to make sure all the nuts and bolts are put in place. And George, you know where you might have to handle that, so that if we bring a process or a program aboard that's similar to this, we have what we call standard operating procedures in place, and you can do a check and balance. You just don't put something out like this and really have no check and balance to come back to you in terms of what you are using your funds for and what you are reaping in terms of returns. We missed the ball in this because this had been around, rumored that there were some problems. And I'm not going to go into that, but you know exactly where I'm coming from.
Ms. Randall, one of the things that I think is important to note is that we actually began implementing safeguards roughly in 2010, 2011 that now helping to show what's going on.
Good.
In the past, they said replace a door.
That's
Now
right.
we're saying replace the door with model number XYZ with lock set 67721 and whatever else. So it gives you some very detailed information that you know what, good. When the inspector or the staff goes to look at it, what we're looking for. And so those, now you'll probably hear that we're being too hard.
Well, you already heard that. Remember, that conversation took place within the last 18 months. They came before you and said that we're being too hard-nosed. I wasn't here, but I've read the transcript in the record. So that's already taken place.
Yes, sir. Dr.
I think over a 20-year period of dealing with CCDI, it started out with a credible situation. But over a period of time, I don't want to use Ponzi scheme in the fact that this was what that was, but a Ponzi scheme starts out that way, everything looks legit, and then it starts falling apart. I think this just started falling apart, not over the past 20 years, but a little bit later than that.
In the last 10 years.
And so we just finally stumbled up on it. Thank you guys for digging into it, correcting it, and trying to salvage whatever we can, so we won't get burnt anymore.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
If I'm correct, because I agree with Bill, I agree with Ms. Randall, I think, and I agree with everybody.
You're just agreeable.
I'm agreeable. I'm very agreeable. But this, what you're asking us in this case, is not giving CCDI anything.
No, ma'am.
Right. I hate to say it doesn't have anything to do with them. We're salvaging our $127,000 investment here, and we get a new homeowner in the city, which is wonderful. All of this other stuff about CCDI and how they bamboozled the council previously is a train wreck, still needs to be looked at, and doesn't ever, ever, ever need to happen again with anybody. And that's where you're going to keep that from happening, right?
That's correct.
Okay, right? So you're on it, you're right, and we need to do this.
Put the proper guidelines in place before you open the door. That's what it's saying.
I mean, you're right. There's a lot of pieces, but
That's right.
you know, this presentation just kind of segued into the other because those questions are still lingering out there.
But in a nutshell, she's right. We need to do this to salvage this one and get it into the.
Yeah. Well, what's in play here is $127,900, almost $128,000. And if this project doesn't get complete, and it's that close, it's to being completed, we've got a seller. That money has to go back to the state. We have to pay it. And so instead of paying the state $129,000, we put up the money to satisfy these liens. None of this money goes to the CCDI.
Right.
Some will go to the IRS, $42,000 of it. The Fosters will get $29,000. But we're motivated because we don't know what their tax liability is with the IRS. When we put this on the agenda, it was less than $42,000. From that time that we put it on the agenda to now, another lien came in from the IRS.
So you got to run real quick tomorrow morning.
And so that's why we need to move on this.
Is there any negotiator?
Somebody's got to pay this. I mean, it's not.
Negotiator, another lien gonna come in if it takes you a day.
That's right. You got to do it.
Go ahead, Fred.
Like I said, the recommendation is to go with the 127.9. The idea behind that is that's the maximum exposure we would have. If it gets to that, then we just say, okay, we'll pay the money to and have to reconfigure it. But it is a family. It is something that will be less than the 127. We felt like if we went to that maximum amount and not go over that, then we would be able to, if something sneaks in the door. And like I said, we've been looking at this with title searches every hour. And they're moving, and you know, we're just scared that something else is going to come in the door, you know, tomorrow or the next day or something like that. So we need to get moving on this. Once it reaches that point and moves to CCDI, from CCDI to Habitat, they've indicated they'll have it finished in 60 to 90 days. And then we'll be able to go to a closing, have it finished, be off our books, and hopefully...
Then you'll get it.
And we'll look at the other issues that are out there, but like I said...
I'd say we move on it. Is there consensus here that we do that? Okay, all right.
It's on your agenda.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
All right, the last item we have is pension obligation bonds. And as you know, we've been talking with you since January. And we have tonight our financial advisor, David Rose, who's no stranger to you, and Joe Mason, who's a vice president with Davenport. They're going to pass out two documents, a skinny one, which is the executive summary, and then a more detailed one that backs up all the information here. I told you that we would start working on this right after our meeting with you about the budget. Gave you at the last meeting a status report on the questions that we're looking at, and we now have answers to those questions. As you think about this presentation, remember that all pension plans have two components: assets and liabilities. If you got $1 worth of liabilities, and liabilities are the benefits that you pay, you need to have $1 worth of assets. With pension plans, figuring the liability is a little problematic. You know the amount of pensions benefits that you're paying to somebody that's already retired. As for that active worker, you don't know precisely when that worker is going to retire, nor do you know how long that person is going to live. But fundamentally, $1 worth of liability, $1 worth of asset. We have 28 cents against that dollar on one plan and 32 cents. We need cash. If we have a bad market, and you'll hear this tonight, but I want to make sure we say it, we can become insolvent with these plans. If we do not put cash in these systems, we're going to run out of money. And so the way we get cash really quick to move that from 28 cents to 80 cents is to consider the issuance of pension obligation bonds, and it's doable. David?
Thank you, Mr. That's why I needed to.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
This is the presentation. That's just a more in-depth version.
Sorry. Look at the skinny folder.
Skinny book.
Which page? Page up.
Council did.
Page down to go to the next slide. Okay.
Yeah, let me apologize to you. We've been working on this thing. David's been down here back-to-back days, and our goal would have been to get you this in advance, but this is important stuff, and I'm putting pressure on them. He will show you two tracks tonight for issuing these bonds. One, a normal track, and the other is a fast track, and we need to be on the fast track.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Again, members of council, Mr. Mayor, appreciate the opportunity to be here. Nice to see some folks back again. Let me start by saying thank you to Mr. Rowe's staff, because without that staff, we couldn't be here tonight, and they just put in countless hours, including Mr. Rowe. So we saw how long he can work and how hard he can, and really appreciate that. That said, Joe Mason is my colleague. Joe has been with us now for 8 years. He has been in and out of the city of Portsmouth intermittently in things that we have done over the last 4 to 5 years. But Joe is our pension expert, and his background, just very briefly, he was at one of the major rating agencies that rates the city. It was Fitch Investors. He ran that for the state of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia, and in part of his specialty was pensions. So Joe is here this evening. I'll make sure he answers the hard questions, but I can always turn the page. But on a serious note, again, we appreciate this opportunity. What you have in front of you, and everyone in the audience should have, is this presentation. This is our summary, our executive summary, but that thick book behind it is where all the numbers and the hard work, and if we have to, we certainly can cite and go to some of those pages. But again, we encourage all of you to look at that over the course of the next few days, few weeks. With that said, as Mr. Rowe indicated a few moments ago, you have two closed single employer pension plans. I know this has been a topic of discussion over the last several years, and you can see what they are. I think the important thing for the council to recognize here is that over the last several years, in your existing budgets that you've had, going into the 2013 budget that we're in right now, you have actually provided essentially the full annual required contribution for these two plans. The unfortunate thing is that even by doing that, you have fallen behind as it relates to the necessary levels of funding, the necessary levels of cash, and in keeping at the rate that you're going, basically you run a very strong possibility of running out of money, if making those plans insolvent, particularly if we have, as we call it here, a bad day. And what we mean by a bad day, of course, is if the overall returns that you expect and need, if you would, don't come to fruition every single year. One of the other points here, and that's right in the middle, is that right now these two plans respectively are at literally 28 and 32% funding levels. What we would like to suggest, and what we're going to recommend through what Mr. Rowe talked about, is getting to a minimum of 80% funding, and by doing pension obligation bonds, that is one of the ways that we get there. So again, no surprise here. Our recommendations and our actions really coincide, and that we need significant levels of cash to immediately shore up those two plans. As I mentioned, we want to go to 80% as a minimum, and then ultimately move to the 100% if we can do that. In order to do that, we see pension obligation bonds, and I say we, staff, ourselves, those experts working with the Boomershine Associates, which are actuarial folks that have been working with us. We work with them on other places. All of us collectively have made a joint recommendation at this moment in time that pension obligation bonds are both feasible and recommended.
If you'll turn with me to page 3, specific.
You got it there?
Yeah. Specifically, when we speak of pension obligation bonds, that may be a relatively new term. What we mean to say by that is these are your traditional general obligation bonds that you issue for capital purposes and so forth. It's just the purpose of the issuance of the bonds is to pre-fund your pension liability. Based on the analysis that we collectively have done thus far, to get to that 80% funded ratio in both plans that David spoke about, we're looking at a bond issue of approximately $150 million. That would immediately boost the funded level of the plans, as mentioned. And how did we come about 80% as the right level? Really, if you look at rating agency criteria, if you look at commentary by the actuarial community, at a level of 80%, that's deemed to be a relatively sound plan, one that's not in any danger of not being able to meet its obligations to plan beneficiaries, and so forth. So what does that translate to, that $150 million bond issue, in terms of costs, budgetary costs to the city? What we did is we structured the pension bond issue over 24 years. If you'll recall from your discussions with your actuary, 24 years happens to be the amortization period that they use in calculating your pension valuation. Okay, so we're not extending this in any way, shape, or form. We're matching it up year for year. We assume, as the retirement board just recently amended their policy, we assume the discount rate or the investment return assumption of 7.25%. That's down from 8%, which you've seen in prior years. And we've assumed a borrowing rate of 4.5%. Now, pension bonds are issued on a taxable basis, and that's really due to federal tax reform in the mid-'80s. So we know that we have to issue on them on a taxable basis, but the good news is taxable rates, like municipal rates, are near all-time lows. So it's a good time to be considering the strategy. These two more quick points. These are going to be fixed-rate bonds, nothing variable about them, fixed for the full 24 years, and just like your normal GO bonds, they can be refunded in the future, subject to a call provision. So when you get down to the bottom line, the total cost of your pension program, if you will, for these two plans is the debt service on the pension bonds plus the remaining costs of the pension, and that's, for the most part, that's the annually required contribution on that 20%. Now we're getting to 80%. We've got 20% left to get where we want to be, which is fully funded. You add those two together, you get to a cost of $19 million. And what's the alternative? We've been, well, I think you've heard from your actuaries from time to time about potentially shortening that 24-year amortization period to something like 15 years. To do that would certainly is feasible, but it would come at a significant budgetary impact to the city. And that calculates out to $6.1 million from your current budgetary level of $17.4 million. So we're at $17.4 for fiscal 13. It's going to 19 per your actuarial valuation.
You're referring to the ARC now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, Mayor. So compared to what you have in the budget currently, 17.4, to shorten that amortization would cost $6.1 million. And importantly, it would not increase the funded ratio over the near term. They would slowly, incrementally creep up. Conversely, the pension obligation bonds gets that cash into the funds, gets the funded ratio up to 80% immediately. And really, from a rating agency perspective, if you go back and look at their write-ups on the city, that's the key thing that they're worried about here right now here in Portsmouth is the status of these pension funds, and that would address that issue head-on.
Even if it's funded with pension obligation bonds, it's okay.
Please hold that thought.
I think their concern was the total debt, no matter what it was. They're looking at your debt capacity, so we just need to be careful with the whole piece. But
we'll address that. Yes, Mr. Mayor. If you'll turn with me to the following page, page 4, this is directly to your point, Councilwoman. What is the potential impact on our credit ratings, our meaning we the city? If properly structured and undertaken for the right reasons, in other words, there aren't any gimmicks here, we're not taking bond proceeds and paying our normal ARC payments, the POBs should not have a negative impact on the city's credit ratings. What makes me underscore this particular finding that we have? Moody's, one of the 3 rating agencies that you work with, just 2 months ago, put out a full-blown report on pension obligation bonds. I just want to read what it says. In general, we consider credit-positive management strategies to be those directed toward sustained improvement in the net funded status of the pension plan. In contrast to credit-negative strategies that seek near-term budget savings without improvement in pension funded status. Okay, that's a wordy way of saying what I just said just a moment ago. So, being part of a broader credit positive effort aimed at restoring a balance between liabilities and values and achieving affordability. So, we are essentially stabilizing the pension cost at the $19 million that their actuary is saying that you have to budget for fiscal 14 by doing the bonds. So we're stabilizing and making it affordable, and we're addressing the liabilities with assets, cash from the bond proceeds, head on. So that's really what we're accomplishing.
So what they're saying, based on our situation with what we're proposing to do, they would look favorable on us moving in this direction. That's what that statement says. Because of the rationale and what we're doing to be able to overcome the challenges in our pension fund. They, Moody's, would look favorable on a move like this. Is that a reinterpretation? Would you use the word favorable?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That is.
I mean, I think so. I think that's what they're trying to imply.
It's still debt in a lot of it. Did we consider anything less?
Let me answer that if I can. Ms. Cherry, I think anything less than 80%, as Joe said, is viewed basically as not really getting to the levels of comfort that the folks in the rating agencies are looking for. The other thing about your particular plans is that they are essentially closed. And as a result of that, what that means is that when you did the old ARC payments up until this year. The problem was they were continually amortized on a too lengthy basis. And that's fine if they are perpetual plans. You can do something like that. But yours have a finite life for all intents and purposes, with the exception of course, y'all being a part of council, that could be part of one of the plans. But for all intents and purposes, you're closed plans. And Joe, correct me, because he is the expert here. But the point is, we wanted to do a one-time correction of this. And getting to 80%, we viewed, based upon input from the rating agencies, as being the right correction. I think that when you look big picture, and that kind of gets us to the next page, because it all boils down to what is our capacity to borrow this money. Like Joe said, it is general obligation bonds we're talking about, and it is roughly $150 million that we're talking about. And as a result, that's $150 million, no matter how you cut it, of additional indebtedness. Right. So let me make it clear, in an ideal world, we wouldn't be doing $150 or any dollars for pension obligation bonds. But it is, I think, the collective view that given the 28 and 32% relative funding at that moment in time, the closed-end nature of this, and the overall budgetary realities of the city, that we would have to have a very dramatic annual increase in cash from your general fund to basically avoid pension obligation bonds. And I think that increase doesn't just stop potentially at 6.1 million extra. It could be considerably greater than that. It could be.
Let me emphasize what he's saying. That 6.1 million translates to an 8-cent increase on the tax rate. So if you're looking at another alternative, where are you going to get the money from? You're going to get it from raising your tax rate, which also has a limit. That's right.
Let me ask you something, Mr. Rowe. There's a page in here that talks about the offset costs.
Right.
Is that considered in here?
Yes, we're going to get to that as well. Yes, it's not considered yet, which we meaning, when I say yet, the $150 million that Joe is talking about, we're sort of getting towards that. You can do the pensions separate from the Social Security offset, but we are recommending, and I think Mr. Rowe would underscore this.
Well, this presentation kind of builds this in layers.
Yeah.
Okay. The first layer is take care of moving it from 28 cents against a dollar and 32 cents against a dollar to 80 cents. The second layer is the offset. The offset is another $80, and we have a way to get that.
So that's coming.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll hold.
But we're talking in the same time span.
Yes, sir. We're talking about doing it all together.
The other question I have, okay, we get to the 150, gets us to the 80% funded. What keeps us there? What keeps us from eroding back to?
That's a very good question.
Whence we came.
Two things. One is that think about breaking this into three components. The first component is to issue the bonds, okay?
Sure.
The second component is to come up with a pension policy.
There you go.
Okay? And the third component is the investment policy, making sure that we're always on top of what the asset allocation is, so many dollars in or percent in, let's say, equities, bonds, real estate, whatever the appropriate mix is. The policy then becomes really important because there are going to be years, get this notion that your arc, we're trying to fix the arc forever. Okay? You're doing 17 now, you're going to 19. If we have some good years in the future where the returns are at 12, 13, 14%, don't be motivated at that time to reduce the amount of money that you're putting into the plan. Take that and put it into the plan.
Right. I guess along that line where I was going with this, what's going to keep us from retreating back to from where we came. And obviously a policy is one thing to do that, but councils come and go, city managers, excuse me, John, they come and go too. But none of us are going to be here long, and that policy can be in somebody's drawer gathering dust. Does that need to have more teeth in it, such as becoming part of our
That'd be
charter?
part of your retirement board.
Mr. Moody, you know what doesn't come and go? Because we come and go as well. We realize that. And what doesn't come and go are the rating agencies. And so once a bond issue is out there,
yeah,
the rating agencies, by requirement, even if we don't, as a city, go to the rating agencies in subsequent years for indebtedness, which seems hard to believe given all cities need to do that for general needs and a regular basis, the rating agencies will annually look at this city. They will look at whether or not your pensions are in compliance with your investment policies, no different than they look every year when we went up to New York to get the recent financing, and they say, are you in compliance with your other policies? And we have to show that them. So the point here is, even if all the parties around this table are gone, that very national, very public review will be able to call out some subsequent council that isn't following its policy and is, as you say, maybe sliding back. And it'll be no different than what they have done now, which is when you look at our credit reports, they are solid and very good credit reports, but they talk about the big vulnerabilities. And that's the biggest vulnerabilities we have, which is the pensions.
And let me reinforce what he said and what Joe talked about from Moody's. The whole state of Illinois has been downgraded by the bond rating agencies because their pension fell into the 30%. They're funding their pension plans, the state of Illinois, far greater than we are. And so what's at risk here is our bond rating in the future, our ability to issue bonds for utilities, for public improvements. And so that's a very good point.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but the rating agencies, they know where we are now, and they give us a warning just about every year that I've been on council. But I guess what I'm thinking, something with more teeth. I mean, you're talking about people's future. You're talking about the financial stability of our city. What could we do beyond a typewritten policy to hard code that's etched in stone, whether it's a charter? Can that be something added to the charter that we don't deviate from that policy?
That's a very good question, and let us give that some thought as to how we might codify that.
Okay.
I mean, that's a very good point.
Because I think your retirement board has some oversight in that area, and I don't think we want to manage them from here. But yeah, let them go ahead. Go ahead.
But we understand. Thank you. What we wanted to do here, though, is to say to council that we have, working with staff, looked at our ability legally to take on this roughly $150 million. You'll notice there in the yellow, we've made an assumption it's $175 million. It's not a typo. The reason we have done that is we said, what is on a worst case basis, sizing of a bond issue, what's the worst case basis? And to add to, I think, what Ms. Cherry was asking, we've also factored in the concept of roughly $21 million of the Social Security offset. And that is the latest number that we have gotten from the various folks that at the city interact. So that $21 million may move a little bit, but we feel pretty good about that number as it's given to us. So the point here is, if we go to what might be the maximum size, which could be $175 million. Joe talked about the $150. We think it's going to be somewhere in that range if you improve with the Social Security offset. The point here is that under either column, we have the ability to do not only the pension obligation bonds that we're talking about, but also, you'll notice here, we've got several millions of dollars over the next several years for your 5-year capital improvement program that you approved, which incorporates not only the courts, which are now on an interim basis and moving most of it to a full-time basis, but also some of those other projects that John talked about. And then we also have the 5-year program of Brian Foster's utility area, and that is about $142 million. And what you'll notice here is that historically, traditionally, we've done that as what we call double-barreled bonds, which means they are true revenue bonds, but they have the backing of the general obligation to get us the absolute lowest interest rates possible. If we do that, we basically have a margin of about $25 million, which is not a lot of margin, and that's why we're showing that. We still have the ability to do that. However, if we take a tact of calling we call the utility strict revenue, we no longer make the utility bonds double-barreled, we make them pure revenue bonds. And no one's to say we have to do all 142, but if we take the other end of the spectrum, what we then have is basically we free up the 142 plus the natural 25, and so we basically, after the next 5 years, still have a margin of about 165 million. The important thing there is that that gives us that comfort level that we can do the things that you need to do. At the same time, you're paying off certain debts, and again, you're incorporating the pension obligation bonds.
Let me help too by saying anything that you pledge your full faith and credit to, those are general obligation bonds, counts against your debt limit. Remember, the debt limit is set by the state constitution at 10% of your total assessed value. And so we issue utility bonds, and we call them revenue bonds, but they're backed by the full faith and credit. What we're telling the bond buyers that if we don't make the rates, if we don't get the revenue from the water rates, we're going to back it up with taxes. Revenue bonds don't carry that backing. And typically you hear coverage ratios. The best coverage is to have, well, the worst coverage is to have 1-to-1. Typically the bond buyer wants to see something greater than, if you got $1 worth of debt, he wants to make sure that you got more than $1 worth of revenue coming in for debt service. So they look for things like 1.5 coverage. Because we have such a solid utility system, we think that if we were to issue revenue bonds strictly, not carrying the full faith and credit of the city, that they would trade very close to a double-barrel bond because they're solid. Think about the money that we get from our utility system. It's not and it's something that is not just young and not tried. Our utility system dates back to the late 1800s. So this is one way of making sure that we don't use all of our bonding capacity. We move the utility debt to strictly a revenue bond. Does that make sense? Okay.
Sure. Go ahead.
So you asked Mr. Moody, it's actually one of those kinds of practices that does have teeth, because once you move to a strict revenue bond, that will succeed any council. It's done by a revenue covenant. That is not a year-to-year appropriation. That is something that's, again, required for the entire term of the bond issue, which could be 30 years. Okay. Joe, you want to?
Sure. One of the things that may be on your mind, I think was, as David and Mr. Rowe alluded to earlier, is that while we'd like to think, well, your actuary assumes for the purposes of the analysis that you're going to have a 7.25% annual investment return, I would like to think that if you look at historical performance, the city's done fairly well to be at or above its assumptions in the past, but there are occasionally some years in which investment results don't make anybody particularly happy. 2008, 2009 time frame certainly comes to mind. So we wanted to introduce this concept of a hurdle rate, and what we're trying to drive at there is if we issue these bonds, what do we need to earn on average over time to maintain that 80% funding ratio? And again, the concept of taking the difference between your current cost structure and the debt service on the bonds and not taking that money and spending it in the operating budget, but plowing it back into the plans, well, two things can happen. If you take that money and plow it back into the plans, number one, if you earn 7.25%, you're going to get to 100% funding in about 12 years' time.
Right, versus 20.
Okay? So you accelerate getting from 80 to 100. So that's one good thing, but what if we don't quite get there? The other thing that is helpful about rolling those savings back in is it lowers the amount of investment return that you have to earn just to stay at 80%. Instead of 7.25%, for the supplemental plan, it would be 6.2%, and for the fire and police plan, it would be 5.6%. Okay? So our hurdle rate, the bar we have to hit to stay at 80%, are those two figures, and anything above that, we're making progress. Okay? But of course, 6.2 or 5.6% are not scenarios such as what we experienced in 08 and 09, where the markets lost a considerably greater proportion of their value than even that. If you look at the bottom of the page, based on market declines of a range between 25 and 40% in any one year, your costs are going to go up just because the value of the assets in the pension funds are going to decline, which means your annual payments go up. We've experienced this before in other valuations. So the real question is, are you better off if you sustain such a decline having issued the bonds or having not issued the bonds? And I would just draw your attention to the numbers listed there. If we sustain a drop in asset values of 25 to 40%, that's going to result in increased costs if you issued the pension bonds between $5.5 and $7.7 million. And if you didn't issue the pension bonds, the costs are going to go up by $6 to $9 million because you just don't have the asset base to cushion the blow. And then in the bullet immediately above that, we just give you, and there are details in this larger book that we handed out, just a range of different outcomes. We thought you'd be interested in seeing what happens if you're on average 2.5, or the bond rate at 4.5, and so forth. And so that, I won't bore you with those details, but the details, the takeaways, the details are there for your perusal.
So the critical thing that we want the council to understand, the citizens to understand, is this. While we are using and expecting $19 million to be your contribution going forward, and that's assuming that, again, we meet these hurdle rates on average. If we get snake bit, and literally 1 week or 1 month after we issue these bonds, we lose upwards of 25% or 40% for whatever reason in the marketplace, and those following years we don't get a big pop back up, we just go back to the 5.6 or the 7% rates. You know, again, it takes 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, to get back, like we saw in 08. The important thing is, yes, under either approach, pension obligations or not going pension obligations, the council will have to, in subsequent years, be putting additional dollars over and above that $19 million in. That's the important thing. But I think what Mr. Rowe was saying, the very early part of this presentation, should we experience a 25 or, gosh forbid, a 40% drop, and having not done pension obligation bonds, it's not inconceivable that these plans could be insolvent within a very few short years. And we're not talking 12 years. We're talking, I think, Joe, upwards of, or as little as 3 to 4 to 5 years from now, they could be insolvent. So that's sort of the Scylla and the Charybdis of thinking about this.
This question, a couple of questions earlier. We know this is keenly on your mind, of how do we simultaneously with the pension obligation bonds, address the Social Security offset issue. To our understanding, it's been a little bit of a bane of contention for a number of years, and the thought would be, if we are going to the trouble to do this pension bond issue and shore up the funds, why don't we simultaneously do the old two birds with one stone sort of thing. So we had your plan actuary on board, New York Life, cost that out. To pre-fund it today would result in a $21 million liability. So we need to come up with either $21 million today, which would take care of that Social Security offset in perpetuity, or we can look at some other ways to potentially structure the pension debt to allow those dollars to accumulate. Okay, so bottom line is it essentially means $2 million over and above what we've been talking about in this presentation to date. So we talked about, if you recall, you're going to 19 million as a result of the actuarial valuation. We can issue pension bonds, and you're at roughly the same place. Now we're talking about an additional $2 million to essentially create a permanent fix for the Social Security offset. And the way we recommend doing that is by structuring the pension bond issue to have a series of interest-only payments for the first few years, and take the dollars that would have gone to principal and put them into the pension fund, and you'll accumulate those assets all the more rapidly. So what you're doing by doing that is saving the interest, the 7.25% that you would have to pay in year 5 through 24 if you just elected to fund that $21 million over time.
And the point then would be, so we would ask that in the upcoming budget that you do, you would go from essentially the 17.4 that you were in 2013. You have to go to 19 no matter what, and just add another $2 million to that to 21. And again, it's just ironic that that 21 is the same number as the Social Security offset amount. So make sure it's not a little maybe misconfusing. But anyway, that's what we'd be recommending. And again, that does nothing to impair that 80%. That's basically making sure that the pensions are at 80%. Your Social Security offset is set and taken care of into perpetuity. And
so David, would it be safe to say it's 21 million is a number we need to be plugging into our budget going out to the next 10 out years?
It is, so long as we get those hurdle rates.
Right.
So long as we get those hurdle rates, that's correct.
And if we hit above those numbers, take that money, reinvest it back into what we were saying, and stay at 21 million, and put those type of triggers in place. Okay.
Correct.
Then you get 100%.
Then you get 100%.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. That's right.
And then you can talk about a different sort of a policy approach.
With good returns at 7.25, you get 100% in 12 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's great.
So I think just because time is getting short, again, our summary, I think you've really heard it. We really, and the word must is the right term. The rating agencies may have been warning us for the last several years, but I think pensions has hit a flashpoint, and we need to be a step ahead of the rating agencies. We are afraid that their committees will come down on us if we end up acting like Illinois and have inaction or inadequate action, and none of this is based upon, as we said, any gimmicks. So with all that, as we've mentioned, the goal would be essentially to go to 21 million. The caveat is that we're expecting to borrow at approximately 4.5%, and that's why we want to talk about scheduling and a couple of ways to look at this, because we have no control over interest rates. If those interest rates move markedly higher over the next couple of months, our hurdle rates again, will be a little bit more difficult to achieve. So we're talking about trying to, as quickly as possible, with your blessing, lock down the interest rates within the range that they are now. That's simply put, and Joe can maybe change the page, but what we've got here is what we call the regular schedule and then the accelerated schedule. And I think I heard Mr. Rowe, when we were handing out the booklets, say that that would be the preferred option if we could. What it really means in the next few weeks is that we know that you've all seen this, as we said for the first time. Under either schedule, we could come back, if you so want us, and address some questions or issues that have come up from the book, come up from our presentation, come up from citizens, what have you. Then, in either approach, what we'd like to do and need to do is go back to the actuaries, New York Life, as well as Boomershine Associates, and make sure that our numbers are actually locked down and, again, are as tight as we're hoping they are. That would happen in both cases over the course of the next few weeks. And here's where the schedule differs, and that is this. We would, under one particular schedule, wait until you finish your budget, wait until the end of essentially the fiscal year. The other is we would just continue to move forward in the month of March. And then the last page here is if that were the case, we wouldn't be seeing the rating agencies until June. In this case, we could see them in April. Then sort of, again, it goes by reasoning. We have to have a legal notice public hearing for the debt because, as Joe said, any new debt, and this is new debt, requires a public hearing. That either is going to occur in July or in this case could occur 2 months earlier in May. And the goal then would be either to sell these bonds in the new year or to basically be done by the end of the fiscal year of 2013. Mr. Rowe?
Yes, and remember, we're using conservative numbers here, 4.5%. I told you at your last meeting that Baltimore came in with an issue within the last 4 or 5 months at 3.49%. Now, they have a better rating than us, but any number that's lower than 4.5% improves these numbers. It lowers the hurdle rate. That's why when you saw that slide, for a borrowing rate of 4.5%, the hurdle rate is 6.2. If we can get it at 4, that number comes down. So we're very much concerned about what the market will do. The Federal Reserve is saying that they're not going up on interest rates for the next year, but you never know about these things. So let's eliminate the risk and put this on a faster track and go while things are right in our favor. Be glad to answer any questions. I know this is an awful lot.
I was going to say, this is a lot. I think we need to absorb this. I'll be very interested in seeing how not only the going from 17 million to 19 and now to 21, how that fits in our budget gap for this year. Exactly. Looking at that whole piece and seeing how much we need to swallow here. But I think, again, I appreciate you breaking this down in this fashion. It's important that we do this. But again, we need to see this in the context of our budget this year. And, you know, we've got some gap. Yes, sir.
If our bond rating drops, what impact is that going to be?
That's a great question. If you don't mind, let me just go back for a second. The irony is we're looking at issuing basically not really just $36 million, but more than that because we have about $50 million of the courts project on an interim basis. So the 50 plus the 36, just round it off, let's say 50 plus 40, we're talking about 130 million, thereabouts. Plus, we have another 140 or so million of revenue bonds that, again, just the overall city's credit quality could potentially hurt. So you're talking about maybe nearly $300 million of debt that is just in the next 5 years that would more than likely have higher interest rates tied to them, whatever the rate is at the going time. So that alone, you start thinking the magnitude, that could be easily that extra $3 to $4 million. You could lose that just there
per
in
year.
Interest rates. Yes, per year. Yes, sir. It's. I haven't run the numbers, but
and this is what I recommend. Give you time to digest this, because both calendars at the front end track the same.
Right.
Let us continue to work. Let us work on the fast track, and let us sharpen our pencils on how to do the Social Security offset. And this is not a test, not uncommon to capitalize both the interest and the principal for the first year. So as we look deeper into this, we want to make sure that you're satisfied that we're on the right track in giving us the direction to continue. So on that basis, is it okay? Well,
Yeah, I think so.
As long as that Social Security offset is part of it.
And
I'm
that's
not
what
going to
I
bring
was
it
speaking
back
of.
to you if it's not. And that's a guarantee.
That's the worst case scenario.
No, ma'am.
If
Yeah. I'm going to have it in the package.
No, he's gonna plug it in.
You
I
gonna plug
assume
it
we'll
in.
plugging this in, getting the information we just received from Janie. How soon will we be getting some numbers for the budget?
Within a month.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're absolutely going in the right direction.
Yes, I do.
And then,
Yep.
okay. All right. Thank you.
Let's move ahead.
Let's
Okay.
move.
That's
Great.
Absolutely.
That was good. It was good briefing.
Thank you.
Good job, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Really
Appreciate
was.
it being here. Thank you.
At least you let us know where we're headed and what we got to work for.
I'm good news about security officer.
I'm just reading the faces. Yeah, that's it. I recommend that you go into closed session.
Council members, are there any city council liaison reports?
Yes, ma'am.
Quickly, I've attended the EDA meeting this morning. Nothing remarkable or new other than the 2 items that are on our closed session agenda.
Okay.
But I have a question about tonight's agenda. Can I
Okay.
do that before we go real quick?
Sure.
I got an answer for you.
Okay.
But my answer person is not in the room.
Okay, I'll come back to it.
Yes, ma'am.
Or I'll ask it out there if I have
That's
to.
fine.
I'll ask it out there.
That's
Okay. Sorry, done.
Anybody else?
I missed that. What was that?
I have a question about an item on the agenda, which he knows about, but his answer person is not here, so I'm going to ask it out there. It's fine.
Okay, but I guess
It's about the RISE Social Ministries Summer Feeding Program. And he's going to have the answer when we go out there.
okay, but I guess do you want to proceed with that if you don't get the question answered? Do you want to defer it, or what you want?
I'm going to wait and ask it out there.
Okay,
And I may ask that you defer.
because if we don't get the question answered, if
we don't have
it's a question, I think it is.
Don't have
It
time
is.
for
I don't think I want to move ahead unless we.
have the
That's fine.
right data.
Yeah,
You understand what I'm?
I know, but I'm still going to bring it up.
Okay.
Then
We're
the
cool.
public knows why we're asking. Yeah.
We're good.
Okay.
Council members, you have before you a motion for
I
closed
move
meeting.
to go into a closed meeting
Hold on a second.
pursuant.
Before you go into that motion, to just make sure that we formalize the matter that we've been discussing now for several months with this disparity study, not to belabor the point, are we all in agreement that we want to direct the manager to go ahead with the disparity study, get this RFQ on the street, and have the attorney have something for us to vote on at the next meeting?
Do we know the cost?
I mean, they should be working on it already. We already
I'm
talked
working on
about
it.
that. We
I
talked
took
about
it
that
from the
already.
the last time that we
Right, but I
talked.
want to make sure we make an official action by council, so
You
there
did.
is no
Yes.
matter to go on. You're working on that, getting an RFQ out to get the study performed citywide.
We started working the very next day from the
Okay,
light.
all right, I want to make sure, so we should have something back tentatively.
I'll send you
That's right.
the timeline, but I told them to move quick because I want this done.
It's gotta be
Absolutely,
done.
right, and we want to make sure that we do that. and-
We will get the cost.
Right.
During
And the
that
thing
process.
is that you don't have to recreate the wheel. There's a lot of models out there.
Well, the school system has already gone through it,
System's
so we
already
can,
done.
one, use
EDOT.
theirs.
Yeah.
As model.
So
City of Hampton, yeah, I just want to make sure we formalize it and on a council matter that there's nothing holding us back from getting the information from you
if you
so we
like
can
to
act
do
on it.
that, that's fine, but you don't need to because I'm working hard on that. And,
Okay,
and
all
it's
right.
going to come
So
back.
we should get something back when?
I will give you a status report tomorrow. I'll send
Okay,
it to
all right,
council.
very good.
Yes,
All
sir.
right, Bill?
Gonna take
I
that
move to
long?
go into a closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711 for the following purposes. A, discussion of the disposition of publicly held real property in the downtown and midtown sections of the city where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position of the city and Economic Development Authority as permitted under subsection A.3, and B, consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff concerning a contractual matter involving property in Victory Village as permitted under subsection A7.
Second,
Mr. Cherry?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
yes.
Mr. Meeks?
Yes.
Mr. Booty?
Yes.
Ms. Simmons?
Yes.
Ms. Randall?
Yes.
Mayor Wright?
Yes.
We're in closed, thank you.